Good afternoon. We are doing it live right here. Let's do some business right now. Weekday afternoons at 4 o'clock, we get right down to business with the news-driven hour right after Ben Shapiro and just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Mottek On Money, live on the air right now, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide too at kbc.com. And your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast at kbc.com, Apple iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. World is hit with a technology nightmare today. A massive tech outage linked to the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike Holdings. Could be the largest ever seen after the issue caused disruption of Microsoft computer systems around the world. CrowdStrike is a publicly traded company. It's trading under the ticker symbol CRWD on Wall Street. The stock fell sharply today after the outage and saw its worst one-day drop in about 2 years. The massive outage hit Microsoft-powered computers around the world, disrupting flights, affecting many businesses, including airlines, airports, the ports of L.A. and Long Beach, for example, and other shipping operations, banks, retailers, Starbucks, media companies, hospitals, 9/11 emergency call systems, and many more platforms around the world. CrowdStrike stock plunged 11.1% for its biggest one-day drop since November of 2022. CrowdStrike's CEO George Kurtz said in a social media post that the company has identified the problem. It was not a security incident or cyber attack as first feared. He said the defect was found and isolated in a single content update for Windows hosts, basically a software upgrade that went awry. Mac and Linux hosts were not impacted by this, by the way. The plunge in CrowdStrike stock cost the company's CEO, by the way, about $42 million in a personal loss as the stock plunged today. CrowdStrike outage affected Charles Schwab, E-Trade, and other brokerages, preventing trading today as well, by the way. I'll discuss today's epic tech fail with a giant on the local tech scene, Howard Miller, Chief Information Officer at the UCLA Anderson School of Management. He also serves on the executive board of the IT-focused group Innovate at UCLA, which includes some of the biggest names on the tech scene here in Southern California. Looking forward to talking to Howard Miller coming up live later this hour. The final night of the Republican National Convention, headlined by former President Trump's first speech since the assassination attempt last Saturday, drew as many as 28 million viewers across more than a dozen cable and broadcast networks. Former President Trump recounted for the first time the assassination attempt at his rally in Pennsylvania last Saturday and said he initially believed he was under attack but survived because of the grace of Almighty God, in his words. On the economy, Donald Trump repeated his promises to lower taxes as well as stop inflation through greater production of fossil fuels here in the U.S. The Republican presidential nominee spoke last night to close out the party's convention in Milwaukee. In former President Trump's words, he said, "I will end the devastating inflation crisis immediately, bring down interest rates, and lower the cost of energy." He said, "We will drill, baby, drill," and predicted that will lead to a large-scale decline in prices. I'll discuss all that this afternoon with Susan Shelley, columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard Tuesday nights here on your favorite station, 790 KBC, as well as our sister station in the Bay Area, the great station KSFO. Meanwhile, Morehouse Democrats calling on President Biden to exit the 2024 presidential race. Today, the latest being Betty McCollum of Minnesota, Kathy Castor of Florida, Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico, and Morgan McGarvey of Kentucky. President Biden's personal physician issued a statement that the president's COVID symptoms are easing as he isolates in Delaware. Of course, isolation has not been a requirement for COVID for years now, by the way. According to his physician, he's taken the antiviral drug Paxlovid and continues to tolerate treatment well, the statement said. California Governor Gavin Newsom has been campaigning as a surrogate for President Biden. I'll follow up on that with Susan Shelley, whose the latest op-ed article, by the way, is titled "Gavin Newsom's Pipe Dream Goes Up in Smoke." Taking a look at the market action today, the stock market finishing sharply lower this week, with the S&P 500's IT sector under pressure today, especially given what happened with that tech meltdown. The Dow, first of all, coming in for a closing loss of 377 points to settle at 40,287. We were at a record high above 40K not too long ago. We had the big gyrations this week with some mega moves in the Dow, more than 500 points. The S&P 500 closed down 39 points to finish out at 5505. The Nasdaq plunged 144 points to settle at 17,727. The S&P 500's tech sector fell a sharp 1.3%, deepening its weekly drop to 5.1%. Tech names were already under pressure before today's tech meltdown, including some of the Wall Street darlings, including NVIDIA, taking a hit this week. The so-called Magnificent One, Apple also taking a hit. We'll take a closer look at some of those names here coming up shortly. We are standing by for one of our prominent guests, and hopefully he will be joining us any moment now. Taking a look at some of the movers today. CrowdStrike Holdings is the name of that company that's been blamed for this worldwide fiasco with the upgrade today that went awry. And that's the stock that led the S&P 500 names lower today, down to $38 at $304.97 at the close. And down some more after hours now, down another $3 at $301 and change. CrowdStrike insiders sold stock before the outage. That's interesting. That report coming out from Barron's. That'll be in tomorrow's paper. Want a refund for your delayed or canceled flight after the CrowdStrike outage? Well, you can get it, according to one write-up I see here today. Nearly 9,000 flights were delayed as of this afternoon. Aggravated airline passengers facing the choice of waiting hours for their delayed flight, rebooking, or just canceling their trip altogether. After that cybersecurity platform software update snarled Microsoft-powered computer systems and toppled travel plans. MarketWatch notes if these passengers want their money back instead of more airport misery, the U.S. Department of Transportation and consumer advocates say they just need to ask for it from the airline. That's the advice we're hearing today. Bitcoin moved up while tech stocks slumped, thanks to President Trump and the CrowdStrike outage, according to analysts following the crypto world today. We see Bitcoin's price jumping today while stocks fell. Investors grappling with that massive global IT outage, and also took in reports that President Joe Biden could drop out of the U.S. presidential race. Bitcoin moved up 6% today to as high as $67,235, the highest we've seen since the middle of June. Bitcoin is still more than 8% below its record high of $73,798, which we saw in March, while still up about 60% so far this year. Looks like the other cryptos went along for the ride. We'll take a closer look at that coming up here shortly as well. Let's take a look at the Magnificent One, shall we? NVIDIA shares moving down $3.16 today, back to $117.93. It hit a record high on a split-adjusted basis recently. In case you've been taking a nap for the past month or so, NVIDIA stock did split 10 for 1 recently, so now trading at around 117. Apple has had a rough week, but today actually managed a closing gain of 13 cents at $224.31 on the news that Apple systems, Mac and so forth, were not impacted by today's tech meltdown. Of course, Microsoft getting a lot of attention today. Microsoft shares did move lower today, down $3.26 at $437.11, as that tech meltdown with CrowdStrike did impact Microsoft platforms. Bringing up some of the other tech names now, let's bring up Amazon. Of course, they had their Prime Week this week, so they were back in focus. Amazon shares closing down 62 cents at $183.13. Netflix among the high flyers. Looks like Netflix today pulled back nearly $10 at $633 and change, and is moving slightly lower in after-hours trading. Looks like a lot of people planning to Netflix and chill following this tech meltdown today, where you couldn't even order a Starbucks at a lot of places today. A lot of the Starbucks around Los Angeles were closed. Some ended up doing these manual orders, but the apps and ordering online was not possible because of the tech meltdown, something we're going to explore further later this hour as well. Taking a look at one of the big winners today, Intuitive Surgical stock moved up nearly $40 at the close of $455 and change, a jump of 9%. Looks like Intuitive Surgical has outperformed its competitors on a strong trading day today. And let's see, we've been tracking the price of gold lately, which has been hitting record highs this week, something else we're going to talk about. But today, gold has moved lower, down nearly $55, down $53.60 at the close today, back to 2402, $2,402.80 an ounce to be precise, a drop of $53.60 an ounce, and a drop of 2% on a percentage basis for the price of gold, which hit a record high earlier in the week. The price of silver, meanwhile, also pulling back, down 82 cents at $29.41 an ounce, down nearly 3% on the day. Silver's had quite a run this week, outpacing the performance in gold. We see the price of silver year-to-date up about 23%. What about platinum? Well, platinum has barely budged on a year-to-date basis. Let's bring up the platinum price, something we're watching as well. Pulling back today by $10.10 at $975.90, a drop of 1% on the day. And taking a look at how platinum has performed so far this year, it is now, down for the year, down 2% for the year, down $22.40 on a dollar basis, down about 2% on a percentage basis. So maybe a bargain hunting there for platinum. Looks like that one may be on sale here at the moment. This is something that we talked about yesterday with the precious metals expert Barry Stupler. If you ever miss any of the previous shows here on Mottek On Money, you can always bring up the Mottek On Money podcast at our website, kbc.com. Then you can bring up what Barry Stupler had to say earlier this week, what Charlie Gasparino had to say this week about J.D. Vance, for example, who was in the spotlight as President Trump's vice presidential pick for the upcoming November election. He's also a big name in the tech world, and Charlie Gasparino did a big write-up in the New York Post about J.D. Vance and what that could mean for the tech world and regulation as well. So if you want to hear those conversations, just bring up the Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Let's take a look at what else is happening in the business world today. We are getting an update very shortly from one of the giants in the tech world about the IT meltdown that's coming up later this hour. Starbucks, by the way, I mentioned earlier, was among the big winners today in the market and a downward market overall. Starbucks shares moved up more than $5 at $79.27 a share, up nearly 7% on the day. It looks like a lot of people were stuck in coffee shops today because they couldn't fly, couldn't take cruises, and all kinds of things happening today. Shipping was impacted. The ports of L.A. and Long Beach had disruptions. And we're looking forward to getting some of those updates as well. On the flip side, one of the other losers today looks like TRV shares, Travelers, that's a insurance company, pulled back more than $17 today at $203 and change. Let's see if there's some news connected to that. Looks like Travelers and Intel shares, losses on both of those stocks contributed to the Dow's drop today of 377 points. Looks like Travelers, the insurance giant, had a revenue miss today, and catastrophic losses topped $1.5 billion. So Travelers among the losers on the day on Wall Street. Intel, let's bring up Intel stock here if we could. Intel having a rough day as well, and of course a big name in the tech world, a tech bellwether. Shares of Intel today moved down $1.89 at $32.98. Let's get the latest on your ride this afternoon, heading into the weekend this Friday afternoon. Let's get the latest on traffic here on 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KBC. Good afternoon. Yep, TGIF. What a week. We made it through. The Dow coming in for a closing loss of 377 points today at 40,287. Down for the day and down for the week. The S&P 500 down 39 at 5505. And the NASDAQ closed down 144 at 17,727. The world was hit with a technology nightmare today, a massive tech outage linked to the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike Holdings. And it could be the largest ever tech outage ever seen around the world after the issue caused disruption to Microsoft computer systems across the world. CrowdStrike's stock, CRWD, fell sharply today. It closed down 38.09 to 304.96. Its worst one-day drop in nearly 2 years. This massive outage hit Microsoft-powered computers, disrupted flights, affecting many businesses around the world. Airlines, airports were affected, ports, Shipping operations, banks, retailers, Starbucks, media companies, hospitals, emergency call systems, and many more platforms were impacted around the world. CrowdStrike stock plunged 11%, and the CrowdStrike CEO saw $42 million go right out of his pocket. That was his personal loss, according to MarketWatch, based on today's stock price drop. Taking a look at the cryptos here, we saw quite a rebound this week in cryptos with Bitcoin rallying, but now pulling back a bit here, down about $400 at 66,836. Ethereum up 4 at 35.11, and Doge has ticked slightly higher to 13 cents. Gold had a rough day after kissing a record high earlier this week. Gold plunging more than $53, nearly $54 lower, down $53.60 at $2,402.80 an ounce. Price of oil taking a hit today, down nearly $3 at $80.14 a barrel. Heading to Europe, looks like we're at 108 now versus the euro. The Japanese yen dollars at now 157 versus the yen. The British pound sterling at 129. Apple moving higher despite today's sell-off, up 13 cents at 224.31. Getting a boost on the fact that Apple systems were not affected by today's tech meltdown. And NVIDIA, the Magnificent One, closing down more than $3, down $3.16 at $117.93. Coming up, I'll be discussing what happened today on the tech scene with Howard Miller, Chief Information Officer at the UCLA Anderson School of Management. He also serves on the executive board at the IT-focused group Innovate at UCLA, which includes some of the biggest names on the tech scene here in Southern California. We'll be taking a closer look at this tech meltdown, which has impacted people here in Southern California in a very big way, and businesses across the board, and eager to get to the bottom of all of this. The company says the problem has been isolated and identified. Whether this is the end of it remains to be seen. We did hear from the CrowdStrike's CEO, who came out with a social media post saying that the company identified the problem and it was not a security incident or cyber attack, he said. He said the defect was found and isolated in a single content update for Windows hosts. Mac and Linux hosts were not impacted by today's meltdown. And now let's get the latest news for you right now on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. If you're wondering what all that smoke is in the sky this afternoon, well, firefighters are attacking a brush fire in the Angeles National Forest. Evacuations have now been ordered near the 75-acre fire in the mountains north of Los Angeles in the Glendora area. According to NBC4, the fire started near the East Fork and Glendora Mountain Roads above Glendora. East Fork Road was closed from Highway 39 to Glendora Mountain Road. A tall plume of smoke rising from the burning canyon. Details about how the fire started not immediately available. The 790 KABC newsroom is on that story, and hopefully we'll have some more details for you shortly. Seniors could see a Social Security trend that hasn't happened in more than 3 decades. Every year, Social Security payments are updated based on the cost of living adjustment, so-called a COLA, cost of living adjustment, which accounts for the impacts of inflation. Seniors usually see inflation on everything from housing to groceries and health care and are really impacted, of course, when you're on a fixed income. Analysts now estimate that next year, the Social Security COLA is projected to be 2.7%. Now, if that happens, it'll be the first time in 31 years that seniors receive a cost of living adjustment of 2.7% or above 4 years in a row. The final night of the Republican National Convention, headlined by former President Trump's first speech since an assassination attempt last Saturday, drew about 28 million viewers. Former President Trump recounting for the first time the assassination attempt at his rally in Pennsylvania and said he initially believed he was under attack, but he survived because of the grace of Almighty God. On the economy, President Trump repeated his promises to lower taxes as well as stop inflation through greater U.S. production of fossil fuels. The Republican presidential nominee spoke last night to close out the GOP convention in Milwaukee. Joining us live now, Susan Shelley, columnist for the Southern California News Group and host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard Tuesday nights here on your favorite station, 790 KABC, as well as our sister station in the Bay Area, KSFO. Susan Shelley, thank you very much for coming to the line this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it.
Give us your impressions of what we heard from President Trump, first of all, last evening.
Well, he did something that reminded me of Ronald Reagan. He gave the same speech that he's been giving all around the country, except, of course, for that incredibly impactful 20 minutes at the beginning where he talked about the personal experience of being shot at a rally. That was so emotional, and all the gratitude for the people and the stories of the other victims. That was so moving. But then he segued into what's really his stump speech, and he did all of his set pieces and all of his set piece policy proposals that people who watch his rallies have heard a million times. But the people who were watching that speech have been fed a steady diet. The people at home watching television, so many millions of them have been fed a steady diet of quotes out of context, accompanied by sneering and sarcasm and anchors saying it's not true and he lies. And instead of hearing what someone else says about Trump, the American people who are thinking who to vote for this November heard President Trump. So even though he went 92 minutes, he was in a subdued voice, which was not his campaign bombastic voice. These were all the policies that have been, as a comedian would say, killing him on the road. These are all the policies that are solid as crowd pleasers. And I think the polls will really reflect that in a few days when they come out, because I believe that independents and moderates who only watched the news and didn't watch any of his speeches in full saw something that really impressed them last night.
On the air live with Susan Shelley. And on the flip side, we heard from some Southern California Democrats urging President Biden to step out of the presidential race at this point. And looks like the parade of those calls is continuing this afternoon. In other parts of the country today, we're seeing other prominent Democrats calling for him to step down. This could be an important weekend, right?
Well, it could be. President Biden says he's not going. And what's happening here is there's no structural way for the Democrats who want to replace him now to replace him. They have the 25th Amendment. If they want to get a two-thirds vote in Congress and say he's not able to do the job, they can remove him from office, and Kamala Harris will run as the incumbent. Or they've got impeachment. I don't think the Democrats want to do that. And they've decided to invent a third option where they try to humiliate the president into stepping down, which is really a remarkable thing to watch. I think it's going to have people taking up for the guy, even maybe independents, because this is just a really disrespectful way to treat somebody, to be insulting him day and night and saying he's going to step down, he has to step down, he can't win, he's going to drag down the ticket. And, of course, that's the real concern that they have. They're concerned that the Democratic turnout will be very low, and it will cause down-ballot casualties for all of the people who are complaining right now. And, in fact, there was a new poll out of Emerson College which found that Trump is leading overall 46-43. And what's interesting is this was a poll of registered voters, not likely voters. Likely voters, it's going to be even worse. So Trump is leading in all 7 battleground states, and he's putting other states into play, like Virginia and New Jersey, that perhaps were never going to be in play. They are now. And if they're looking at registered voters in these polls, which they are, likely voters is even worse for the Democrats. So I think that's what's generating all the panic. They are seeing themselves in the minority for the foreseeable future, and all of their power to do all the things that they do behind the scenes or in front of them will be gone, because they won't have gavels or subpoena power. They won't be able to block somebody else's legislation as a committee chair. They won't be able to indict the president or impeach the president or do any of the things that you would need a majority in order to maneuver. And it is not impossible, if these polls hold, it's not impossible that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States with solid majorities in both houses.
On the air live with Susan Shelley. In the meantime, President Biden dealing with a health issue, COVID, we're told. The president's physician issuing a statement today that President Biden's COVID symptoms are easing as he isolates in Delaware. And, of course, isolating yourself when you have COVID has not been required, by the way, for quite some time, not even here in California, by the way. We're told he's taking the antiviral drug Paxlovid and continues to tolerate treatment well, according to the statement we received from his physician. So he's dealing with that as well. Given this chorus that we've heard at a pretty high level, Susan Shelley, what What's your bet on what's going to happen here?
Well, my bet is that he will not step down, and the Democrats will be running him at the top of the ticket. You know, this is really the fruit of the poison tree of suppressing the Bernie Sanders campaign in the Democratic Party for 2 elections. Because if you remember, Bernie Sanders was barnstorming the country in 2016, running against Hillary Clinton, filling arenas. And the DNC was exposed as having done dirty tricks within the party to crush his candidacy and push Hillary Clinton forward. And then something similar happened in 2020, where Bernie Sanders was running very strong in the primaries, and all of a sudden all the establishment moderate Democrats said, we have to stop this, and 2 or 3 of them got out of the race and endorsed Joe Biden on the same day. And then he won the South Carolina primary, and he went on to the nomination. If they had not stopped the Bernie Sanders movement and they just had the fight, they just had it out, Bernie Sanders would have lost nationally and they'd be done with this because the country's not socialist. And then they could have moved on and they could have regrouped and done that third way Democrat kind of thing that Bill Clinton did successfully. But instead, they suppressed all the progressives, and now it's just coming back to chew them up. They have a candidate who can't put a sentence together, and they can't win with him and they can't win without him.
You've written a very powerful op-ed article, which is getting a lot of attention on social media, titled "Gavin Newsom's Pipe Dream Goes Up in Smoke." Governor Newsom had been working as a surrogate for President Biden. He was there at the debate that night and defended Biden's performance and so forth. Tell us about your write-up, your op-ed article, and what about Gavin Newsom and all this?
Well, you know, here in California, we have a perspective on Gavin Newsom that other states don't have. We see the actual results of his record, and it's appalling. It's just terrible. We see his energy policy driving up our costs and putting us at the edge of rolling blackouts. We saw his oppressive COVID policies. We see how he doesn't respect the First Amendment. He doesn't respect the Second Amendment. We see how he has tried to close prisons and tell us that we can't believe our lying eyes, that crime is getting worse. We see all of this. Everything is worse since he took office in January of 2019, and nothing is better. And he can maneuver around and smile for the cameras, but it's not going to fool people in California. His approval rating in this state has fallen, I believe, to 44%. It's below 50%. There's an ongoing effort to recall him at rescuecalifornia.org. And he's not doing well here. If he's not doing well here, how in the world does he think he can be elected president of the United States?
Excellent point. And again, the op-ed article is titled "Gavin Newsom's Pipe Dream Goes Up in Smoke." It's been interesting to watch. He had been campaigning for President Biden across the country, right, and not getting much of a response. So tell us more about that.
Very small crowds. I was really surprised at that. I thought he would have some California celebrity among the Democrats and that people would come out to see him. But on the video that he posted on his own page on X, his own account, so you would assume that's the best he can make it look, like the Salisbury steak on the cover of the frozen dinner. They worked at that. That's the best they can make that look. Gavin Newsom posted pictures that show 100 people, 200 people in New Hampshire, in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, in South Haven, Michigan. He drew very, very small crowds. And he was thumping, he was barnstorming. He was giving the political speech and all perspired out there in the heat, giving it his all. And people were just watching. Almost like a paid game show audience. They were just watching. You did not see, oh, can I have your autograph? Oh, can I have a selfie with you? You didn't see that. So there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of enthusiasm for following California's big leadership that he's always bragging about.
All right, we're going to be talking about that big tech outage today. Hopefully you were not impacted by all of that, Susan, and that you made it through the day. We're going to be focusing on that here in just a moment. And thank you very, very much for joining us live here today with that thorough analysis as always. And again, her latest op-ed article, which appears on the various Southern California News Group platforms, is about Gavin Newsom's pipe dream. And be sure to check that one out. We've been speaking with Susan Shelley, columnist for the Southern California News Group, which includes the LA Daily News and the Orange County Register, host of the Howard Jarvis radio show, heard on Tuesday nights here on 790 KBC and our sister station in the Bay Area, KSFO. Susan, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank.
And right out to the freeways now, 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. A technology nightmare today for businesses and consumers around the world. A massive tech outage linked to cybersecurity company CrowdStrike Holdings. Could be the largest we've ever seen after the issue caused disruption to Microsoft computer systems around the world, impacting flights, disrupting businesses, including airlines, airports, the ports of LA and Long Beach affected by all this, other shipping operations, banks, retailers, Starbucks, media companies, hospitals, emergency call systems, and many more platforms were hit by all of this around the world. CrowdStrike stock took a big hit today, its biggest one-day drop in a couple of years, and the company's CEO himself, well, he lost about $42 million in personal wealth today because of the plunge in that stock. He did announce earlier today that this was not a security incident or cyber attack. He said the defect was found and isolated in a single content update for Windows hosts. Joining us live now, a giant on the local tech scene, Howard Miller, Chief Information Officer at the UCLA Anderson School of Management. He also serves on the executive board at the IT-focused group Innovate at UCLA, which includes some of the biggest names on the tech scene here in Southern California. Howard Miller, thank you very much for taking the call this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks for having me on the show.
All right. Take it from the top. Give us your reaction to this epic tech fail today.
The reaction is kind of all over the place, right? I mean, you outlined it very well in your summary there. This has been so pervasive across all industries, across many of my peers who have the software installed. Started late last night. Look, at the end of the day, the disruption is massive, and the workaround and the fix to the problem is one that's mostly manual, right? So some things are back online, and some are still going to take days for us to all figure out how to unwind all of this.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
Maybe not to this extent. I mean, I wish I could sit here and say to you that this is not entirely uncommon in our industry and with software providers, but I think it speaks a lot to how we as companies deal with software, deal with third-party providers, how reliant we are on that software, and how when something like this happens, how well set up we are to recover from such an incident, right? So this kind of speaks to how we should have incident response plans and how we can just put all of the pieces back together when something goes offline like this, but not to this extent, and certainly not in a while back.
It's been an honor to attend some of the Innovate at UCLA events over the years, so I know you have the greatest minds there at UCLA, certainly. What's been the discussion about all of this among the movers and shakers you've interacted with today regarding the situation?
A lot of them have been pretty busy. A lot of them didn't get a whole lot of sleep last night, that's for sure, and maybe still not into the day today. Like I said, I think it's twofold, right? So the extent of this outage just isn't as simple as there was a problem and we can apply something and then fix it, right? There is so much manual effort to put these systems back together because in essence what happened is the computer goes offline and it's just not accessible by any of the remote techniques that we would normally use. So you have to go manually to hundreds and thousands of machines, in your business, depend upon the size and scope to address the problem, right? So people are trying to figure out how we can do that at scale. In IT, we try to script things a lot. People are trying to figure out if there's any way that we can apply any type of automation to address these problems. And I think there are a couple companies maybe out there that have figured out how to do this with some script in some of the scenarios. But really, it speaks, as I said, to when something goes out at your business, having a plan, having it documented, knowing how to execute on it. So if an outage like this happens, you can just recover your business as quickly as possible.
So early on, the CEO of CrowdStrike said it was not a security incident or cyber attack. It was simply a software update, but might it be a security incident or cyber attack?
We don't have any evidence that it is at this point. I think accidents happen. This is human nature in software development. We could probably take this conversation in a lot of different directions, but unfortunately in every company, software developers from time to time make mistakes, right? There is a human element. So in all likelihood, somebody just made a mistake and it's unfortunate, but it certainly has grave consequences.
And heading into the weekend, certainly it's going to be a working weekend, it sounds like, for a lot of people in the IT world. And looks like Microsoft stock didn't budge much, but certainly CrowdStrike stock did. And looks like Linux and Mac systems were not impacted here. Is that going to be a consideration for businesses moving forward?
Look, I think Microsoft is the victim of this as well as everybody else, but their stock moved in conjunction with the market and in general with where tech has gone this last week. I think as Mac and Linux, they probably dodged a bullet in this case, but I still think it speaks overall to the supply chain of how companies are reliant on other companies in terms of how they do it. We talk a lot about third-party risk management and doing assessments and just knowing how all of the pieces of your infrastructure fit together and where potentially gaps are in either that infrastructure or when something can happen and when it can go wrong, what the dependencies are. So again, as I've spoken about how you can put all of the pieces back together when you go offline and as quickly as possible because of the revenue impact of such outages.
Certainly. Well, Howard Miller, thank you very much for taking the call on this big story, and we'll see how things unfold in the week ahead, and hopefully have you back on again soon on all these matters. Howard Miller, Chief Information Officer at the UCLA Anderson School of Management, also serves on the executive board at the IT-focused group Innovate at UCLA, which includes some of the biggest names on the tech scene here in Southern California. Howard, thank you very much, and hope you have a good weekend.
Frank, thank you so much, and have a great weekend yourself. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And we're closing out the week with a down day and a down week. The Dow down 377 today. The S&P 500 down 39. The NASDAQ down 144. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang. And I'll be back with more at 4 Monday afternoon right here on Mottek On Money, 790 KBC.
The Rolling Stone Music Now podcast gets inside the biggest stories with Rolling Stone senior writer Brian Hyatt, Snoop Dogg, and Lotto.
Let me give you one of my secrets. I remain the biggest kid in the room at all times. There's a kid in you can't believe that. Look at where you at. Keep making it about fun.
Yeah, we blessed to be able to do a job that's like fun.
There's two funds that's the most important funds in the world. Funds that you make off of the fun that you have.
Rolling Stone Music Now, wherever you listen.